February 1995. Barings Bank, Britain's oldest merchant bank, banker to the Queen, collapses overnight. One trader, one hidden account, £827 million gone. How does a 233-year-old institution vanish in a weekend? Nick Leeson didn't come for money. He grew up in Watford, a working-class town north of London. His father was a plasterer. He left school at 18 with one A-level. By every measure, he had no business being in banking. But in the 1980s, the City of London had a problem. The financial world was exploding. New markets, new instruments, new money, everywhere at once. Banks needed bodies. Smart, hungry, fearless bodies who can handle chaos. Leeson was all three. He landed a back-office job at Coutts Bank in 1985. Back office means paperwork, settling trades, fixing errors, cleaning up after the real bankers. It wasn't glamorous, but Leeson was good at it. Dangerously good. He understood the mechanics of trading at a level most floor traders never bothered to learn. He moved to Morgan Stanley. Then, in 1989, he joined Barings Bank. Barings wasn't just any bank. Founded in 1762, it had financed the Napoleonic Wars. It had funded the Louisiana Purchase, the deal that doubled the size of America. The Queen herself kept accounts there. This was the establishment, the untouchable institution, and they hired Nick Leeson to handle settlements in their futures division. In 1992, Barings sent him to Singapore. The job: manage back-office operations for their new futures trading desk on the CIMEX exchange. CIMEX, the Singapore International Monetary Exchange, was young, fast, and mostly unregulated by Western standards. Leeson arrived and immediately impressed everyone. He was organized. He fixed a chaotic settlement department in wheat. Management loved him, so they gave him more responsibility. They made him the floor manager and the head of back-office settlements simultaneously. Stop right there, because that decision is the single most important moment in this entire story. In any properly run bank, the trader and the person checking the trader's work are always different people. Always. That separation exists for one reason: to catch mistakes. Or worse than mistakes. Barings put both jobs in the same hands. Nick Leeson was now marking his own homework. In July 1992, one of Leeson's junior traders made an error. A small one, a £20,000 loss on a botched trade. In banking, errors happen. There's a standard process: log it, report it, absorb it, move on. Leeson didn't do that. Instead, he opened a new account to hide the loss. Account number 8888. In Chinese culture, 8 is the luckiest number. 5 eighths is practically a joke, maximum luck. Leeson would later say he chose it almost randomly. But account 8888 would become the most expensive accounting line in British banking history. At first, the logic seemed almost reasonable, to Leeson anyway. He'd hide the loss, make it back with good trades, close the account quietly. Nobody would ever know. It was a cover-up measured in tens of thousands of pounds. But markets don't cooperate with cover-ups. The losses grew. By the end of 1992, account 8888 held £2 million in hidden losses. Leeson kept trading, kept hiding. Here's what made this possible for so long. Barings' internal controls were essentially non-existent. London management received reports from Singapore. Leeson prepared those reports. They received audits from Singapore. Leeson's team facilitated those audits. An internal audit in 1994 actually flagged the problem directly. The report warned that Leeson controlling both trading and settlements was an excessive concentration of powers. The report recommended separating the roles immediately. Barings management read it, acknowledged it, and did nothing. Nothing. Meanwhile, something else was happening. Account 888 wasn't just hiding losses anymore. Leeson was using it to fund increasingly large speculative bets. He was trading futures contracts on the Nikkei 225, Japan's main stock index. His strategy was a short straddle. Think of it like this. Imagine you bet that the weather tomorrow will be calm. Not too hot, not too cold. You win if nothing dramatic happens. You lose catastrophically if anything dramatic happens at all. Leeson was betting billions that Japanese markets would stay stable. For a while they did. And Leeson looked like a genius. By the end of 1993, the hidden losses in that account had reached £23 million. But Leeson's reported profits for Barings were so spectacular that nobody looked too hard at the numbers underneath. London was thrilled. They were sending millions in margin calls to Singapore, essentially cash to support his positions. They believed it was funding legitimate client trades. It wasn't. It was feeding the hole. And the hole was about to meet an earthquake. By 1993, Nick Leeson was untouchable. Not in the criminal sense, not yet. In the way that golden employees become untouchable. The kind where nobody asks questions because the answers are too good. Barings' Singapore operation was reporting extraordinary profits. In 1993 alone, Leeson's desk generated £28 million. That was 10% of Barings' entire global profit, from one desk, in one city, run by a 26-year-old from Watford who'd never finished university. Back in London, the board was delighted. Leeson's bonus that year was £130,000, on top of a salary most people his age couldn't imagine. He and his wife Lisa moved into a spacious expat apartment in Singapore's most sought-after district. Dinners at the finest restaurants, weekends in Bali, the full expat fantasy, and Barings was paying for all of it. He was celebrated on the trading floor. Colleagues called him the King of Singapore. He was 26 years old. But here's the thing about living a double life. It takes an enormous amount of energy. Every single day, Leeson was managing two realities simultaneously. Reality 1, the brilliant trader delivering impossible returns for Barings. Reality 2, account 888, growing darker and heavier every week. By the end of 1993, the hidden losses in that account had reached £23 million. By the end of 1994, they had exploded to £208 million. £208 million. Hidden. In plain sight. Inside the same bank that trusted him completely. How did nobody notice? This is where the story gets genuinely uncomfortable. Because people did notice, sort of. Barings kept wiring cash to Singapore to cover margin calls on what they believed were client accounts. At one point in late 1994, they wired £354 million in a matter of weeks. Internal Treasury staff in London raised questions. Where is all this cash going? Why does Singapore keep needing more? The questions traveled up the chain. The answers came back down. It's Leeson. He's fine. He's our best man. That was the answer. He's our best man. There's a psychological term for this, authority bias. When someone produces results, we stop interrogating how. Barings' senior management had convinced themselves that Leeson had found some extraordinary edge in Asian markets. They didn't understand futures arbitrage well enough to know it was impossible, but they understood the profit numbers, and the profit numbers were beautiful. In 1994, a prominent financial magazine profiled Barings' Asian operation. The headline praised their aggressive but disciplined approach to emerging markets. Leeson was mentioned as a key architect of their success. He gave a brief, modest quote. He smiled in the photo. Account 8888 was 9 months away from destroying everything. On the other side of the world, a city of 1.5 million people was going about its day. January 17, 1995, 4:46 in the morning. The Great Hanshin earthquake hit Kobe, Japan. Magnitude 6.9. 6,000 people died in 75 seconds. Entire neighborhoods collapsed. Elevated highways crumbled like cardboard. It was a human catastrophe of enormous scale. But 3,000 miles away, in a glass-walled trading floor in Singapore, Nick Leeson was staring at his screens watching something else collapse entirely. The Nikkei 225 fell immediately. Markets hate uncertainty. And a major earthquake in Japan's second-largest city was maximum uncertainty. Remember Leeson's bet, the short straddle. He'd wagered that Japanese markets would stay calm. They were now in free fall. In one day, his positions lost tens of millions. A rational trader closes the position, absorbs the loss, lives to trade another day. Leeson did the opposite. He doubled down. If you've ever watched someone lose money gambling, you know the look. The jaw tightens. The eyes go slightly blank. The logic shifts from how do I win to how do I get back to even. It has a name, loss chasing, and it destroys people. Leeson began buying Nikkei futures contracts at a frantic pace. He was betting the market would recover immediately and save him. He needed Tokyo to stop falling. Tokyo kept falling. Between January and February 1995, Leeson accumulated 61,000 futures contracts on the Nikkei. That represented a $7 billion exposure. $7 billion. Riding on the hope that a market rattled by a deadly earthquake would magically stabilize. Meanwhile, London kept wiring cash. £200 million in January alone. The Treasury team was alarmed. Now, something felt wrong. A young analyst named Tony Hawes flew to Singapore to investigate. He met with Leeson. Leeson explained everything calmly. He showed Hawes paperwork, client accounts, offsetting positions. Everything balanced perfectly on paper. Hawes flew back to London satisfied. The paperwork looked fine. Of course it looked fine. Leeson had prepared the paperwork. He was the only person who knew the paperwork was fiction. And by February 1995, even he knew the fiction was over. February 23, 1995. Nick Leeson woke up and made a decision. He was done. He left a 2-word note on his desk at Barings, Singapore. "I'm sorry." Then he and Lisa packed bags and fled to Malaysia. They would eventually make it to Brunei, then Germany, then Frankfurt Airport, where Interpol was waiting. But we'll get to that. Back in London, February 23 started like any other Thursday. Emails, coffee, morning briefings. Then someone tried to reach Leeson in Singapore. No answer. They tried again. Still nothing. A manager called the Singapore office directly. The note was found. "I'm sorry." Senior management stared at those 2 words and felt the first cold wave of something they couldn't name yet. They opened account 8888. The losses weren't £50 million. They weren't £100 million. They weren't even £208 million, the figure from just weeks earlier. They were £827 million. £827 million. In a bank with total capital of roughly £440 million. Barings didn't just have a problem. Barings was already dead. They simply hadn't been told yet. The calls began immediately. Barings chairman Peter Baring rang the Bank of England. The conversation was short. The message was simple. "We need help." The Bank of England convened an emergency meeting that same night. Every major British bank was called in. The question on the table: can we build a rescue fund? Can anyone absorb this? They ran the numbers. They looked at the exposure. They looked at the losses still accumulating in real time, because Leeson's positions were still open, still bleeding. One by one, the banks said no. The rescue failed before it started. By Sunday, February 26, it was official. Barings Bank, 233 years old, was placed into administration. Founded the year before the American Revolution. Gone in a weekend. The British press went into a frenzy. How does a 28-year-old trader destroy a 233-year-old institution? Where had the money gone? Where was Leeson? Those were the questions screaming from every front page. Leeson and Lisa had been moving fast. Malaysia to Brunei. Brunei to Abu Dhabi. Abu Dhabi toward London. Bizarrely, he was heading back. Some accounts suggest he believed he could negotiate, that somehow this was survivable. He never made it past Frankfurt. German police arrested him on March 2, 1995. He was extradited to Singapore, the scene of the crime. He looked exhausted. He looked, for the first time, like exactly what he was, a man who had run out of road. The investigation moved quickly once the paper trail was examined, and the paper trail was everywhere. because Leeson had to falsify so much, so frequently, that the evidence was essentially self-documenting. Fake client accounts, forged confirmation letters, internal reports he'd manipulated for 3 straight years. Investigators found that Barings auditors, both internal and external, had reviewed Singapore operations multiple times. Each time, Leeson had prepared the materials they reviewed. Each time, the audits came back clean. It wasn't sophisticated deception. There were no elaborate shell companies, no offshore accounts hidden behind lawyers. It was almost insultingly simple. One account, hidden by one man, because nobody else was allowed or willing to look. The Bank of England launched its own investigation. The Board of Banking Supervision published its findings in July 1995. The report was scathing. Management in London had received warning signals repeatedly. They had failed to understand the risks Leeson was running. They had sent hundreds of millions of pounds to Singapore based on explanations they never verified. The report identified a total of 15 separate management failures. 15. Not one missed signal. Not 2. 15 distinct moments where someone could have stopped this. 15 moments where nobody did. In December 1995, Nick Leeson stood in a Singapore courtroom. He pleaded guilty to 2 counts of fraud. The judge sentenced him to 6.5 years in Changi Prison, one of the toughest prisons in Southeast Asia. Leeson served 4 years before being released early. He'd been diagnosed with colon cancer while inside. He survived. More than can be said for the institution he destroyed. While Leeson sat in changing, Barings was sold. The buyer was ING, the Dutch banking giant. The purchase price was £1, £1 sterling, for a 233-year-old bank. £1. When Barings collapsed, 1,200 people lost their jobs overnight. Not rogue traders, not executives who ignored 15 warning signs. Secretaries, analysts, graduate trainees on their first week. People who had nothing to do with Singapore futures markets or Account 888. Many had invested their own savings in Barings stock. They lost those too. Some had been at the bank for decades. They were out before lunchtime. One retired Barings employee described it simply. She said the bank had felt like family. It felt like that right up until it didn't exist anymore. The clients weren't much better off. Barings managed money for charities, for pension funds, for institutions that had trusted the Queen's own bank with capital they couldn't afford to lose. Some recovered funds through the ING acquisition. Many didn't recover everything. The numbers sound abstract from a distance. They weren't abstract to anyone who lived them. But here's where the story moves beyond tragedy into something more useful. Because what happened after Barings changed global banking permanently? The Bank of England's 1995 report didn't just document failure. It forced an industry-wide reckoning. For the first time, regulators demanded clear separation between trading operations and back-office settlement. The exact separation Barings had given Leeson permission to ignore. Banks worldwide were required to implement independent risk management functions. Not advisory, not occasional, mandatory and independent, reporting directly to senior leadership. Internal audit trails had to be verifiable by people outside the chain of command. CEMEX, the Singapore exchange where Leeson operated, overhauled its margin call monitoring entirely. The exchange had been sending margin call requests to Barings London. London had been paying them without question. New rules required exchanges to flag unusual patterns directly to regulators, not just to the banks themselves. The Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, the body that sets global banking standards, accelerated work on what became Basel II, a comprehensive framework demanding banks hold capital proportional to the actual risks they were running. Not the risks they reported they were running, the actual risks. Today, Leeson's story is required reading in virtually every serious banking qualification, not as a cautionary footnote, as a central case study. Because what he did wasn't unprecedented genius. It wasn't sophisticated criminality. It was embarrassingly simple. One account. hidden by one person, funded by a management culture that rewarded results and punished questions. That culture didn't die with Barings. In 2008, Jerome Kerviel lost Societe Generale 4.9 billion euros through unauthorized trades. In 2011, Kweku Adobali lost UBS $2.3 billion the same way. Different banks, different traders, same fundamental failure. Someone was marking their own homework, and management was too delighted by the profits to ask how. Every single time, investigators found the same thing. Internal warnings existed. Internal warnings were ignored. Nick Leeson was released from Changi prison in 1999. He had beaten the colon cancer. He wrote a memoir, Rogue Trader, which became a film starring Ewan McGregor. He now tours the world giving talks to banks and corporations about risk management. The man who destroyed a 233-year-old institution, paid to explain why. There's something almost perfectly ironic about that. He charges significant fees for those appearances. The banks pay them. Barings Bank survived 2 world wars. It survived the Great Depression. It survived a century of financial panics, crashes, and crises. It did not survive one man with access to one account and a management team that never asked the right questions. The lesson wasn't about futures markets. It wasn't about Singapore or earthquakes or short straddles. The lesson was simpler and older than any of those things. Trust without verification isn't trust. It's just waiting to be robbed. And that's how one trader's hidden account ended 233 years of British banking history in a single weekend.